Decentralized democratic differential defensive acceleration. So DAC is this philosophy that was in this post that I wrote on Techno-optimism back in late 2023. And then I followed up on it with a post at the start of this year. And the goal here is that it's about accelerating technologies, but it's about accelerating some specific technologies to build toward a specific vision of the future, a future which is technologically great and also great for us as people. So one of the core ideas in DAC is that a technological landscape that is more defense favoring. So in the sense of being one where defense is easy and attacking is hard is something that is both safer for obvious reasons, and at the same time is more naturally favorable toward a free and open and pluralistic future. So this is a bit of an interesting insight, right? And so in my original post on Techno-optimism last year, one of the examples that I used is Switzerland, where it's this amazing classical liberal utopia. Everyone has very positive opinions about its governance. It's the country where nobody knows who the president is. And then you ask, well, how is something like this able to survive here and not in other places? And a big part of the answer is that Switzerland is surrounded by mountains. And so Switzerland gets defense almost for free, right? And then in the meantime, if you think of the Eastern European and Siberian steppes, well, that's the exact opposite of defense favoring. And so those lands basically keep on getting taken over by bloody dictators fighting other bloody dictators. And so this is an analogy that like you can take and you can find examples of it across lots of other different contexts, right? So if you think about cybersecurity, for example, then there's basically two ways to do cybersecurity, right? One way is the like attacking the wolves strategy, and that basically means, well, you try to identify, who are the hackers, and you have some central authority that comes to an opinion of these people are the attackers, these people are not the attackers, and then you go after them, and then that central authority needs to be able to spy on everyone else, and then you have different groups that try to find and like hoard vulnerabilities in each other systems, and you end up getting something which is like not actually all that safe, right? And the other approach is the armoring the sheep strategy, right? And that strategy basically says to try to upgrade cryptography as much as possible, to upgrade user security as much as possible, and in general try to take advantage of the abilities that these technologies give, and like actually build systems that are secure without depending on some particular central actor enforcing their opinion of what secure means, right? You can think about this also in the info space, for example, right? So the difference between info defense being something like community notes versus, or for example, info defense being tools that try to more automatically expose people to more sources of information in a relatively neutral way, versus info defense being like we as a society try to anoint one centralized group of fact checkers that then push forward one perspective of what is true and false and what is good and bad, right? And so basically, from a technological perspective, try to develop the technology that tries to solve all of these problems of defense and safety and truth in a way that is much more incorporated into our basic infrastructure in a neutral way, as opposed to through having like basically one big Hobbesian Leviathan that everyone then fights over to control. And so defense favoring technology, again, is safer. And so if we can adjust and build technologies to try to make all the different aspects of the world look more like Switzerland than like the Eurasian steppes, then we get a world that is safer, and we get a world that is more favorable toward a free and pluralistic future. And so let's build this technology, and let's make it open source and available for everyone. So this was the slide that I had at DIAC Day in Bangkok, and this is basically showing the DIAC technologies across a couple of different spheres, right? And so you see a few different dimensions here, right? So one of those spheres is the world of bits versus the world of atoms, right? And the very famous age-old distinction from Peter Thiel, and the other distinction is between, or well, within the world of atoms, you can talk about micro versus macro, right? And generally, when people use and think about the word defense, they mean like macro scale physical defense. And even there, actually, like often people mean things like weapons, but like there's macro scale physical defense that has nothing to do with weapons, right? So like, for example, just resilient forms of agriculture, like methods to make sure that the world can survive a massive collapse of supply chains and still keep everyone fed. That also counts as physical defense. Biodefense, protecting against pandemics. Cyber defense, so this is things keeping computers secure, keeping blockchains secure, keeping encryption secure. And info defense, so protecting against things like scams and misinformation. And this distinction between cyber and info defense is something that, as far as I can tell, is unique to myself. But the core difference here that I think is important is basically that cyber defense is a defense where every reasonable person agrees who the attacker is and who the defender is. Info defense is where, well, one man's misinformation is another man's unfairly censored valid point, right? And so here it's especially important to try to create mechanisms that are not trying to pre-encode and favor one particular side. Now, one new dimension that we have here is the survive versus thrive dimension. And this is one of the realizations that I've had and other people working in these spaces have had over the last year, which is that the technologies that help protect us when times are tough are often in many ways have deep connections to the technologies that will let us thrive when times are more cooperative. And so I'll talk about each of those things in this presentation. So first of all, crypto tech is a subset of DIAC, right? So Bitcoin, Ethereum, and so robust decentralized networks, applications built on these robust decentralized networks can keep running and keep surviving in very harsh situations. Ethereum's and Bitcoin's record of not going down is far stronger than the same record of basically any centralized system. Computer security technology, so within the crypto space, this includes things like wallets, but wallets are just crypto's version of a bigger cybersecurity problem, which is identity and authentication and authorization. Also, zero knowledge proofs let us benefit from people's data and get a lot of benefits out of data, being able to train on it, being able to personalize services from it without actually violating anyone's privacy or actually collecting that information. So on the bio side, right, COVID was a great example of how centralized biodefense can fail, right? And we can look at this from a whole bunch of different angles, right? So first of all, very early info suppression, right? So there was info suppression about COVID in China at the beginning. Then from the World Health Organization, there was this infamous tweet that COVID is not airborne. And basically what happened there was that there was an argument made that a lot of people were scrambling and trying to hoard like masks, and so we have to tell this white lie and basically tell people that COVID is not airborne to get people to stop going after masks so that the doctors can get them. But the problem is that these kinds of approaches are incredibly fragile. They really easily overfit to present day situations. And so circumstances changed, became unpredictable, and they just created this 3-year-long meme where a lot of people just ended up having the opinion that COVID is not almost entirely an airborne virus, which is actually the truth. And so people wasted a lot of time on scrubbing surfaces, and we didn't actually get air quality figured out. Centralized social distancing mandates ended up getting a lot of people angry. It ended up being very bad for a lot of people's mental health, ended up failing in a lot of ways. Vaccine mandates, so vaccines themselves are great, but the info culture, again, basically tried to paint a much more perfect narrative about the vaccines than could actually be justified by the science. And this was, of course, was not able to meet the actually much more messy reality. And so we now we have large groups of people that just end up hating vaccines entirely. And also at the same time, the government's just most world governments have just completely stopped even trying to fund. So the DAC, and in particular Balvi, which is a group that I helped to fund thanks to some money from dog coins back in 2021, actually helped support some potentially much better solutions. So one is clean indoor air. So basically, all of the most dangerous diseases are airborne and dangerous in terms of ability to cause huge amounts of damage to huge numbers of people quickly and unexpectedly. And we have done a huge amount of progress over the last few centuries in making our services clean, making our water clean. We have done basically nothing for air. And so we have different technologies. So ventilation is the most obvious, a low-tech one, then filtering, and then ultraviolet light. So basically, ultraviolet light is kind of the more risky one, but it's more experimental. But if the studies show that it works well, then it could be extremely cheap and extremely powerful. But filtering also works well. Then passive testing. So there are breathalyzer tests that are coming very soon that you'll be able to just breathe into, and they'll tell you whether or not you have some disease. Open source epistemics, and then open source vaccines, and easily manufacturable anywhere in the world, and also a lot of research and treatment. And all of these things that are being developed are actually open source, and they're designed to be accessible to anyone in the world, even at very low income levels. So that's all bio. So we can also think about decentralized info defense, right? So info defense has been a hot topic the last 10 years, a lot of concern about how do we even tell what is true and what is not true. And the natural solution that a lot of people just instinctively gravitate to is, hey, this particular group of experts looks trustworthy. Let's just give them the right to define what is good and bad and what is true and false. This, of course, ends up making a lot of people angry and doesn't actually work that well. And that group of experts often ends up being very wrong on important things. So what might you do that's different? So one of the things I'm a big fan of, community notes. It's this system that got introduced to Twitter a couple of years ago, and it uses this algorithm to try to have this democratic voting method to identify notes that make sense to add additional context to a post. And it uses this really clever mechanism where it's not just a naive vote, but it actually tries to elevate notes that are agreed upon by people who normally disagree with each other. So it intentionally tries to be anti-polarizing. And community notes is amazing because it really goes after everyone, right? It goes after left-leaning people, it goes after right-leaning people, it goes after the US, it goes after enemies of the US, it goes after even corporations, even Twitter advertisers often get community notes saying hey, this thing's basically a fraud slapped on it, which is one thing that I really respect Elon for continuing to allow. Then we have prediction markets, right? So prediction markets are also a technology for identifying probabilities, which can tell you to what extent some particular concern is actually a big deal. They can help you plan for the future. And so here, you have Elon saying civil war is inevitable, and here you have a market, UK civil war in 2024, and saying 4% chance. This little spike here, I think I actually bet on this market, and I earned a bit of money, about a nice 8% APY, and helped knock it down to 3%. So it's potentially very powerful tool. And I also recently wrote a post on Info Finance trying to explore this kind of idea further. DAC in other theaters. So safe and decentralized AI is an interesting one. So the way that you think about DAC from an AI safety perspective is basically, if you ask the question, well, how concretely might a super intelligent AI actually do something really crazy that's close to killing everyone or taking over the world or doing something a step less bad but still extremely harmful? And the most obvious vectors are, one, it launches a super pandemic. Two, it hacks into all of the computers. And for the first one, we have BioDAC, and for the second one, we have CyberDAC. Secure operating systems, secure hardware, and zero knowledge proofs. So another recent new theme is bridges between technologies for surviving and technologies for thriving. So interesting examples here. So first of all, some of the biotech work against long COVID has shown the importance of viral persistence. So viruses staying in reservoirs in the body for extremely long periods of time. And this actually potentially has ties to Alzheimer's, and so it's relevant to longevity research. And the kind of scanning work that can detect these kinds of things is actually the same types of scanning work that can support brain-computer interfaces. So OpenWater, open source company that's doing medical imaging, very personal-sized and easily available. It could work for diseases and scanning and detecting whether or not you have cancer, microclots, similar types of things, and it could also be used for BCI. Then epistemic technologies for high threat environments, prediction markets, community nodes, has tie-ins to epistemic technologies for low threat environments. So Polis, for example, which is meant to help relatively high trust groups, but that still have some polarization, find consensus, has a lot of shared principles with community nodes. Prediction markets actually get used internally at a few companies. I have some information that even major AI labs use them internally. Then open hardware gets you benefits in terms of security, and it also gets you benefits in terms of accessibility, right? So a lot of different themes here, and generally, the underlying idea here, right, is that there is this whole array of technologies, a lot of which you would be familiar with if you come from and care about crypto, but also a lot of other different and interesting ones that are all organized around this same vision, right? Which is basically, how do we create this world that can survive and thrive in a way that respects the values of pluralism, in a way that helps us solve some of the challenges and some of the risks that new technologies bring, without requiring a centralized gatekeeper that is put in charge of them. And so I invite everyone to help build technologies in any of these areas. Also come to the upcoming DAC Summit in SF, where we'll be talking about these things in a couple of weeks, and we'll help make the world more decentralized, democratic, and prosperous. So thank you.